All right. Good morning, Dad.
Good morning.
Today is Wednesday, January 21st. And do you want to start with some good news?
Good news.
I have a video of Mark Carney that I saw that I think was very exciting.
Yeah, go ahead with that. I think I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So let me play this, and I think this could be a good jumping off spot.
We knew the story of the international rules-based order was partially false, that the strongest would exempt themselves when convenient, that trade rules were enforced asymmetrically. And we knew that international law applied with varying rigor depending on the identity of the accused or the victim. This fiction was useful, and American hegemony in particular helped provide public goods, open sea lanes, a stable financial system, collective security, and support for frameworks for resolving disputes. So we placed the sign in the window. We participated in the rituals. And we largely avoided calling out the gaps between rhetoric and reality. This bargain no longer works. Let me be direct. We are in the midst of a rupture, not a transition. Over the past 2 decades, a series of crises in finance, health, energy, and geopolitics have laid bare the risks of extreme global integration. But more recently, great powers have begun using economic integration as weapons. Tariffs as leverage, financial infrastructure as coercion, supply chains as vulnerabilities to be exploited. You cannot live within the lie of mutual benefit through integration when integration becomes the source of your subordination.
Yeah.
I never thought I'd say this,
very well put.
Yeah, I kind of want to move to Canada now. It's insane. I've never heard a Western leader speak with such clarity on this subject.
Yeah, I agree. Sometimes a sentence falls out of some Western leader's mouth, and he said we get excited, but it never seems to amount to much. Including Trump. Occasionally he says something, or Marco Rubio, but there's never any follow up. And I don't even know if they really understood. Maybe even these leaders misspoke when they said that, or it was a stray thought that just can't happen to tumble out. But that was very coherent, very clear. Extremely well expressed, and it means something because it follows on the heels of this rapprochement with China. In other words, he is not just saying these things, he's acting on them. It's just like he's looked at the situation and said, look, right, let's stop pretending like the Europeans are, that we're part of this one big happy community, the international community, which imposes these, these rules, these objective rules on the world. Obviously it's not. We saw it happening. We saw other people being abused by the major power, again, under the cloak of this international rules-based order. Now we're being abused, and okay, it's over. We played the game for a while, but we're out of here. So off to China he went, and now we have this speech at Davos. It's quite remarkable.
Right. I also thought just the admission that the rules-based order was always phony to begin with was significant. That he announced like this. We always knew that this was.
Yeah, he said partially false, but it seemed he admitted to it. It sounded like the more he went on, the more that partialness seemed to be a very big part anyway.
Yeah. Well, in my mind, this seems like a huge break in the united front that the West has always been. This idea that we are this bloc and we stick together, and this seems to be the real, to me, a huge break in that dam. That the multipolar world is coming, and there is a leader now in the West that recognizes it and is moving towards integrating into that system. So do you think, or is it just that I've been so desperate to hear somebody speak like this that I'm getting too excited about this statement that Mark Carney said?
I think we should be cautiously optimistic. I'm sure there's going to be a great deal of opposition within Canada. And Canada still has a very, very powerful neighbor with all kinds of levers. But I think this is highly significant. Again, as we're just saying, the clarity, with which he spoke, and the fact that he's backed it up with actions. And we're not talking about a minor country. You can point to Viktor Orban or Fico, but the thing is, they are the leaders of really small countries that really can't make a difference, and may eventually be crushed by the EU. Canada is a member of the G7. This is very significant, I think. We got to continue to watch this guy. This is a surprise,
Right. Well, I guess what I'm looking for is for other countries to follow suit, because he speaks with such clarity. I think other leaders have to recognize that there's some truth to it. And it's coming with this on the backdrop of Trump, trying to take Greenland and threatening, 7 European countries with more tariffs. And just the way that he speaks to everybody is just so rude. I just think on a personal level that people are just done. And so
I should hope so. Yeah.
Yeah. So do you think then that we can start to see some more countries in Europe maybe grow a little bit of a spine and take a pragmatic approach like Mark Carney?
I don't know. You would think so. Actually, I heard the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, being interviewed, and he was just talking about the spinelessness of the Europeans and how it was just, frankly, almost revolting. And he said, come on, people, grow a spine. This is, obviously this constant groveling hasn't helped you. Stop groveling and stand up. And I think many of us are thinking the same thing. There have to be people in Europe that are thinking that. But at the same time, I was looking at some clips from some of the other speeches at Davos. For example, Mark Rutte. It says, okay, yeah, we can talk about Greenland, but above all, Ukraine. And we've heard Kaja Kallas say the same kind of thing. And, I think quite a few of them are just, their main concern is that that Project Ukraine, will lose U.S. support. It's already lost a substantial share of it, and I think that's quite significant. I think that may be fatal, but they're afraid that it's going to lose all of it. And so I think quite clearly, in my mind, people like Mark Rutte and Kaja Kallas, they are willing to sacrifice Greenland. They say, okay, let him have Greenland because we just need to keep him on board, keep on his good side. I would think probably the majority of European leaders are going to do the same. It's just because I've been following these clowns for years now, and I just don't think they have it in them. Now, I hope we get a surprise,
But they honestly think that they can if they give up Greenland, then Trump will just go all in on Ukraine. I mean, this is what's so crazy about the Ukraine war is they don't seem to have a plan. Like, what's the objective? You to start World War III? I mean, even if you did, like we said, even if somehow we go all in and we push the Russians back and march on Moscow, well, then, then they engage their nuclear doctrine and then the whole world ends. So there's no way to win here. So I just don't understand what they're hoping for. What's going to happen is they'll lose Greenland, and then Ukraine is already lost, essentially. They don't have power. The electricity's out. So what you think that's really what they're thinking? They think that the U.S. is just going to come bail them out?
I don't think they're thinking much at all. That's the problem, is they're not really thinking strategically. They're just responding emotionally, but they are emotionally committed to it. And they just can't, it's, again, Putin is Hitler, and if we let him take Ukraine, he's going to come after, the Baltics and Poland next. It's something that they've convinced themselves of, and it just says, we can't appease them. It's just morally unacceptable. We have to stick with Ukraine to the, well, as long as it takes, right? And they just haven't budged from that. I don't think they're really capable of it. Well, maybe they are. One thing you see, like within Ukraine, you had a lot of very brave people. I think I mentioned one journalist, but others are coming out now that they've spent nights, cold nights in their apartments. You say, well, I think there was a member of the RADA who said this. It was just like, it used to be easy, to think about it because we were insulated from the reality of war. And it was just, it was something that we could make brave statements about. And now that we're shivering in our apartments, it's different, isn't it, my fellow members of the RADA? So I think the reality is coming home in Ukraine, but I don't know that it has, and maybe some of that will get through to the European leaders. Again, they don't have a plan. I know nothing is going to work. It's just a kind of a question of how fast they're going to lose. Again, the U.S. has withdrawn a lot of support. I was just looking at a chart of funding for the Ukraine war, that showed both the U.S. support and European support. And there was a tremendous amount of support, kind of that came at the end of Biden's term, and that continued afterwards because all those funds had been allocated already. But then it dried up, about halfway through last year. And the Europeans made an effort to compensate for that, for the shortfall. And so through the summer, they were able to send a lot of funds. But then you see in the fall, it drops off sharply. And Ukraine is getting just less money, and I'm sure many fewer weapons too than it has throughout the war. So right there, it's already a massive crisis, a looming catastrophe. But still, the U.S., provides the intelligence and the satellites. I'm sure that I know that weapons are still getting through there. So they are playing a role, and it's not a role that will actually lead to victory for Ukraine. That's clear, but they can maybe extend the war maybe another year. I don't, and just during that time, I know it doesn't make sense, but in that time they're not thinking rationally; they're just hoping for a miracle. But they understand that it's just over immediately if the U.S. withdraws now, and so this is their plan: keep the Americans in. That's not really much of a plan, but keep the Americans in. Keep the Americans in. They'll blow up our pipelines, and take our land, and whatever, but keep them in.
Yeah, well, it just seems like if major cities like Kiev and Kharkiv, all the major cities in Ukraine can't keep the lights on, these people are freezing, it's the middle of winter, then to me that is the death blow. How can you sustain a war when you don't have electricity, a modern war?
Yeah, no, it's hard. Yeah. Of course it means suffering for the civilians. That's what we talk about right now. The lights are off, the heating is off. But it also has a huge impact on the war, on the military side of things, because again, the various workshops and factories cannot churn out weapons. The trains can't run, so logistics gets shut down or is greatly impeded. Yeah, it becomes very, very difficult to wage war. And it seems like the Russians have taken it to that point now where they could shut the whole thing off very quickly. There's some fears, a discussion within Ukraine is that next they'll go for, not the nuclear power plants themselves, but for the substations that are connected to those nuclear power plants, because virtually all of the power that Ukrainians that remains in Ukraine, is being generated by those nuclear power plants. And if they take those offline, that's it. There's nothing. And
right. Yeah, and I think when you don't have power, any illusion that people may have that somehow they're going to win this war starts to evaporate quickly. You can't turn the lights on in your main city. Just think about it in the U.S. If all of a sudden a city like New York or Washington, D.C. can't keep the lights on, people know, this is the end. It's over. Yeah, it feels right. Every part of your life is now being affected. You can't hide from it. No amount of propaganda is going to tell you otherwise, that things are okay and we're going to turn things around. Things have been getting steadily worse, and now you can't even stay warm in your own apartment. You can't cook food. You can't. The railway station doesn't work. You can't read a book at night unless you have candles. I mean, people know. So, and then the other thing as well is just because Trump has just gone completely crazy and going on this Greenland route is that Ukraine is getting pushed out of the news. Even though it's in its most dire situation ever. But now people are talking about Greenland. This is the crisis now. So I think what's going to happen is that if the Europeans really think that giving Greenland will bring Trump back in on the Ukraine project, I think they are completely delusional. I think Trump is going to take Greenland. It's Ukraine is out of the news. Ukraine's going to lose this war probably pretty soon, the way things are going. And then Trump will just say, look, well, we stopped Russia from taking all of Ukraine. And so we have a victory there. And look what we got, America. We got a landmass the size of Mexico, right here. Now we look how powerful we are. Look what we've done. So it's going to be he's going to paint it as a huge victory. And the Europeans are just going to have nothing. Destroyed economy, no infrastructure, no energy, and they lost Greenland, and they lose the Donbass and probably half of Ukraine. Kiev and Kharkov and Odessa are going to go too.
Yeah. No, it's a disaster for them. And it's one that was, not that I expected Trump to take Greenland, but but otherwise it's just very, very easy, predictable. We could see it coming.
Right. So it's amazing when you say that you think the Europeans will just kind of play ball with America after everything we've done.
Yeah, well, I think that's what we're seeing. I mean, the statements that they're making. The one person who struck a different note, of course, was Carney. The Canadian Prime Minister. But every clip that I've seen from speeches given by European leaders, is telling me that these people are still hopeless. They are hopeless. They're not. They're just not incapable of removing themselves from this. This delusion that they've really embraced.
If Mark Carney is being so vocal and open about what's happening now, this rupture, and that the United States is this bully and weaponizing this whole system it's built against even its allies now, then do you think that the U.S. is going to go after Canada pretty hard? Because this is a huge problem, right? If they want to maintain this order, the Europeans are staying in line like good little vassals. But if your giant neighbor to the north is all of a sudden saying, we're not part of this system, and they're doing more and more trade with China, which is what the U.S. says, this is our enemy, we got to beat China and everything. And all of a sudden Canada is flourishing because of the economic activity from China. The U.S. can't have that, right?
Yeah. I don't know. It's hard for me to believe that, for example, the U.S. would attempt to invade Canada. They certainly can slap tariffs on it, assuming that the Supreme Court grants that power to Trump. They will find out about that within a few weeks.
Do you think it really matters what the Supreme Court says? It seems like we live in a system now where it doesn't matter. We were talking about some Supreme Court ruling, I remember months ago, that was supposed to come down. And it seems like what happens is just things just get pushed back and back and back until people forget about it. It doesn't matter. We've been seeing the same thing with the Epstein. There's an order to release the files. They just say no. So does it?
Right. Well, yeah, I know that there have been cases where it seems like the administration has ignored decisions made by, let's say, appellate court judges or that kind of thing. But I don't think it has directly defied the Supreme Court. Now, it's always possible, again, under Trump, that it could happen. And that would just be another, step in the direction of dictatorship. We just slide farther down that slope. And we'll see. But, because clearly that would enrage Trump. He loves these tariffs. He believes that the tariffs are doing so much good. He uses them, not just as a stick to punish these unruly students and, threaten his enemies and his friends alike. But he also believes that it's been of tremendous economic benefit and that it's bringing in, it has brought in tens of billions of dollars. In his mind, it seems to be hundreds of billions of dollars. And the thing is, like, if that decision is made against him, saying that he has abused his authority in imposing these tariffs, those funds that were raised will have to be actually refunded. They will have to be returned to the importers that have paid those tariffs, and that's a huge amount. So anyway, he's talked about that. He's aware of that possibility, and he's clearly very, very upset that anybody could even be thinking about that. So we'll see how he takes it. It'll be interesting. But anyway, yeah, I mean, let's say that he's able to continue to wield that weapon. Yeah, he's wielded it against Canada. He'll do it again. But I think the Canadians have made the decision is that, like, we just can't play this game anymore. This guy is too unpredictable. It's unfair. We can't appease him. Let's just go to China. And that's what they're doing.
Yeah. What's kind of disappointing is that it seems like there's this common sentiment amongst Americans that everything is the fault of the rest of the world. Everybody is freeloading off the United States. Everyone's taking advantage. And I see this, that the Europeans are always taking advantage of us. Screw them. And I think a lot of people are kind of excited about the idea of taking Greenland, which I'm surprised at. First of all, is there any truth to this, that like countries are taking advantage of the U.S. or freeloading? It seems like I've always felt like we've been taking advantage of our system to force the use of the dollar and our control. That's the whole point of it, right?
Right. Well, let's say in the case of NATO, I think you can make that argument persuasively that the Europeans have been free riders, and that's been true for decades. I've heard discussions of that, from many years ago. This is something that there have been an awareness. There have been complaints by the U.S., but we haven't done anything about it because we just think, okay, this is a system that we want to support. And actually, it's a system that, NATO is something that the U.S. dominates. So for geopolitical reasons, we'll pay this economic cost. Now, because over the years, in the past, the Europeans were supposed to pay 2% of their GDPs towards NATO. And in general, they didn't do that. And they didn't really pay a price. So, if Trump came in, he did initially say, no, you got to cough it up. I think that's fair. Now he's insisting on 5%, which would have really huge economic consequences if you insist all of Europe do that. And I think the Europeans are doing what they can not to meet that target. So within NATO, I think you have an argument about it. As for trade in general, well, these all have been negotiated. It's not like anybody said that the Europeans are cheating. You think, okay, maybe our past trade arrangements were not fair. We need to protect more American industries or something. Yeah, you can renegotiate and make adjustments. But it's not that that the Europeans were, especially when it comes to trade, were cheating. I don't think anybody says that that they've actually not followed the rules. These are rules that have been worked out, through the WTO and between the U.S. and Europe. And, maybe you think that we should renegotiate them, but it's not, to say that doesn't mean that they were cheating.
Yeah, and even with NATO, to me, it seems like, NATO is a bit of a scam, because once you're in NATO, then basically you have to buy your weapons from the United States, and you buy these overpriced weapons that don't really work, don't do anything. And just an example, I think you probably heard this as well. Alexander Mercouris is saying that the Oreshnik missile that the Russians have made only cost $3 million for them to make. This very powerful hypersonic missile. Whereas the United States, for example, the PAC-3 MSE interceptor that we use, $6 to $7 million for one interceptor, and you have to fire two of them. So you fire two of those, that could be $14 million there. And where they can make an Oreshnik that's unstoppable at $3 million, that has multiple maneuverable warheads flying at Mach 10. There's clearly something's wrong here. We see the price tags of our equipment. Yeah. $1 billion for a Patriot system, battery system. Like, what is this? And I saw, the one in Kharkov just got blown up. Okay, well, there goes $1 billion. Like, and the thing is, we know that the Patriot system doesn't even work very well to begin with.
Yeah, no, that's true. Well, I think I've said earlier that the high price is really the point of the system. I mean, everybody has an interest actually in keeping the prices high or within the United States. So many people make money off of this, the lobbyists and, of course, the manufacturers themselves. And they're very, very happy with the arrangement. And the Congress, approves these packages because a lot of these congressmen, they know that when they finish their terms, choose to retire from Congress, they can become lobbyists and they can become part of, this very, very comfortable arrangement. Again, it's something that it's just kind of taken shape. It's like a tumor that's grown over the decades. And it doesn't, we have a system that really does not, its main purpose is not to defend the United States. It's, first of all, to enrich all the participants, and then second, to allow us to bully weaker countries. I mean, I think if you look at the kinds of systems and the price tags, that's the conclusion that you have to reach.
Well, then we can't really say that we're taking advantage of countries with NATO. These NATO countries taking advantage of us. We're taking advantage of them by saying,
it's a good point. People don't talk about that. Okay, yeah, maybe they're not meeting their targets and the budgets, but our MIC is doing very well. That's one thing. We've talked about NATO expansion and how that has led to really the Ukraine conflict. If you want to point to one development, which that above all is what sparked the conflict in Ukraine, the expansion to the east of NATO. Now that was done for geopolitical reasons, but it was also done just for reasons of greed. I mean, again, the MIC said, this is great. Every new member of NATO that we get, we just have sort of a client, a new client, and one that is completely bound to us. We just got a captive client. Let me put it that way. And so they were completely in favor of it. And it's quite clear, that various think tanks supported by the MIC, churned out all kinds of papers on how it's important to get these various countries into NATO. I wouldn't say that it's all that. There's also the geopolitical vision that's very important. But that was part of it. That was part of the reason for that drive to the east.
So that huge factor really was just greed. Just a few people in the MIC wanted to line their pockets. Yeah. NATO's been such a bad bargain for Europe, and now look what's happening. One NATO country is wanting to take territory from another NATO country. It's like this thing, it's over. I just feel like NATO has been just this. It's a failed experiment.
I think a lot of it. People are looking at that and saying that it's over. Now these people in charge are just not able to. I don't think they can adjust to the reality. Maybe I'll be proven wrong. Maybe Macron will actually finally wake up and rather than, express a few opinions that seem to show some sort of awareness of reality, he'll actually accept reality and start, working towards new policies, towards a complete reorientation of Europe. But I wouldn't bet on it.
Yeah, you just think that there would be, military personnel, people high up, political leaders in Europe that would just look at things rationally. If they can just see like, well, if we weren't part of NATO and we really care about our defense, then, if we were able to shop the global market, then, for example, China has produced a hypersonic missile, a private company, that costs less than $100,000 per missile, $96,000. This is insane. And it's a private company that created these things, can fly Mach 7, take out, highly maneuverable. It's nuts. And everything that you buy from the United States is going to cost 100 times more. And you can't. So if you're just looking at it rationally, like, why are we doing this? And we have, for example, the fighter jet, the J-10, which is China's older model. It had this skirmish between India and Pakistan, and it seemed like the J-10 performed flawlessly. Shot down multiple Rafale jets, which cost 3-4 times the amount of these J-10s. So if you're just looking at this as a country, it's like, well, surely I should buy this equipment is better and it's cheaper. Why am I buying the equipment that's more expensive and doesn't function well? And I heard a lot of the American equipment also. America has a kill switch and everything. If they don't want you to use it, they still have complete control over it. That's not true with the Chinese systems.
Yeah. I think we're going to see for the longest time, again, it's just that because America was the hyperpower, you just dealt with them. And I think often you knew, okay, yeah, I am paying too much for this. But it's just like, that's part of the deal. Okay, it's sort of like giving them a bribe on top of everything else, or protection money. It's like a protection racket because they are the hyperpower. And I need to buy my weapons from them to be part of their, let's say, in the hopes that I can be part, within their protective umbrella, and maybe not a formal ally, but, they'll come to my aid and if I'm ever attacked. That's the hope anyway. And then there's a question of trade, for such a long time. This was the U.S. market was by far the most important in the world, and you just had to make these compromises, again and again. You understood it was not in your best interest, but you just had to do it. But we're living in a different world now. And then maybe there also was, okay, they knew that these systems were too expensive, but there was a lot of hype about American weapons. They were certainly hyped, during the first Gulf War and the Iraq War, and everybody saw the videos of the smart bombs and the cruise missiles, and so there was this belief that American weapons were the best by far. Now, and maybe at one time, like the 1990s, that was true. That again is no longer true. So all of those things have changed. Again, there's always a lot of inertia. A lot of people are just unwilling to kind of give up this belief that they've had so long, and it's been so part of really, the way they've understood the world and understood their place within the world. But I think it's just inevitable because the reality is now so very different. There's a really, if you insist on buying American weapons now and, you think the Americans are going to protect you, they're just as likely going to attack you or slap terrorists on you. We live in a different world. And the consequence is that, the rest of the world is going to be turning away from the U.S. and looking for options and, actually accepting the new multipolar reality.
Do you think that this will, as this progresses, and it feels like it's accelerating, this whole collapse of the U.S. empire, do you think that what will happen is that the dollar begins to break, that we might experience hyperinflation here? What happens? Because as the world turns away, and it seems like the U.S., we're running out of tools to use, and what we often use is, like Carney was saying, economic coercion,
right,
exploiting supply chains and supply lines.
Right.
Then this just means that people are going to have to circumvent the U.S. financial system, and we already see the world doing that in large part.
Right, that's already begun. That process, began a while ago and accelerated, especially after the launch of the SMO, and it's going to continue.
Then what's happening? If that's the case, if we're seeing this happen, we're seeing huge volumes of trade with China and Russia and other countries that are just completely circumventing the SWIFT system, the U.S. financial system. Then in my mind, that seems like, well, okay, then we should have like a glut of dollars being released, and somebody has to absorb those, or else we see inflation. But it just seems like nothing's really changed, even though the reality in the world has changed. But somehow we're the financial system is more or less still, we haven't felt the effects. We have to some extent, obviously. We've had a lot of inflation here. Things got more expensive, but you know what I mean? I feel like.
Yeah, right. You would think, again, there are, I think the reason that we haven't seen a real collapse, or a very severe recession in the U.S. economy is the rise of AI. That's one thing. It's just that has compensated for a lot of the weaknesses that are so very obvious. So that's one strength, that again is impossible to predict. That's one reason why it's very difficult to make, real firm forecasts about any economy. So that's been driving a huge amount of investment, and we're seeing some productivity gains because of it. But it was similar. There was an internet bubble, at the end of the 1990s. And the internet was for real, but there's always overinvestment. And then the bubble pops, there is a crash that follows. And that happened, at the beginning of the 2000s. So the AI bubble won't last forever. And then I think we're going to see, a real crash. And the thing is, like in the past, like, for example, when we had that very severe financial crisis in 2008, about the mortgage-backed securities, or the dollar was still very strong. And so we were able to ride it out because actually, even though it was this crisis was caused by the U.S. market, the world still just, when there was a crisis, what did they do? They went to the U.S. dollar. They started buying treasuries. And so essentially they're giving us money. When you buy a treasury, you're loaning money to the U.S. That's what you're doing. And so we didn't really pay the price of our own economic, let's say, miscalculations. But this time we probably will, because you don't see the same willingness to to, to invest in the future of America, by buying bonds. There's been a real obvious movement out of U.S. Treasuries. And, that's been, in the short run, the Fed has been able to kind of cover that up. But when there's a crisis, and there inevitably will be one, we'll find out that we don't have that usual tool. We don't have that lifeline that we always had to get us through. And we could see very, very severe economic, and a very severe economic crisis as a result.
Does the government collapse usually when there's some type of major crisis like hyperinflation, because if what you say is correct, and I think it is, that if this AI bubble pops, then all of a sudden we're going to see Trump is probably going to start turning on the printing press again, huge amount of pressure, drop interest rates to zero, anything to like get the stock market back up, boost it up. But like you said, there's going to be this glut of dollars flowing in. There's not going to be people absorbing it. People won't buy it. We'll start to see inflation. Will that just break? Like, what happens? Do countries fall apart when that happens?
Well, often they do. Probably the most famous example is the Weimar Republic in the 1920s. I think everybody's seen the pictures of wheelbarrows full of cash. And a lot of people have argued, I think, with persuasively, that was in large part the reason for the rise of the Nazis. It's just that people looked for radical solutions because the system was just not working. It was just hard to live from day to day. That kind of crisis is going to have a profound impact. It doesn't mean that the government's going to fall, though that's a possibility, but it does mean that that people will become willing, to look at truly radical solutions. Whether we're talking about revolution or the election of a party that that pursues just a real break from the past. That whether it's of the left or the right, whether we're talking about the adoption of real socialism or, some sort of some form of fascism, I think, or some combination of the two, all those things become possible, and other things that we probably can't even conceive of right now.
Okay, well, do you think that will be what ends up bringing down the empire at the end of the day? We've talked about all the geopolitical issues, which I think is leading to this the destruction of the system. But the United States, we don't have to worry about being physically invaded or attacked. Right. So I feel like the only way that this crazy experiment that we're in ends is with the destruction of the monetary system or financial structure we have.
Right. A military defeat can have a huge impact on, a true obvious military defeat. Again, generally we fight these proxy wars. We maintain, a distance from, we fight these wars, that are on the other side of the globe against much weaker countries, or, well, in the case of Venezuela, it wasn't actually a war, but a military operation. It was on our side of the globe, but we saw what happened there. None of those things have much of a consequence for Americans. It's something that's just on TV for most of them. And, some people will express disapproval. Other people will approve of it. But again, it doesn't really have that impact on their daily lives. And it's when you ask them, opinion polls, what's the most important thing? It's very rare that some foreign policy issue is towards the top. I think it really should be for various reasons. Again, what we do can lead to the deaths of millions of people, or result in millions of people becoming refugees and all that, just for humanitarian reasons, but then also for our own interests. We're talking about our because of our actions, we are really kind of weakening the foundations of our own economy, to a very dangerous degree. But again, people don't see that. They don't experience it. They may think, oh, that's stupid, or even, why would Trump take Greenland? But if he takes it, it won't be the most pressing issue for them, and they might get used to it pretty quickly. If we have something like hyperinflation, that's completely different. that really people will feel it. They'll suffer it. It's a little bit, you can say it's analogous to what's happening in Kiev. I was saying that Kiev was living in a bubble within Ukraine. So, all these liberal nationalists in Kiev are pro-war and they just, it's always just keep the war going, they cheer every time a drone hit an oil refinery or, whatever it might be. And now, all of a sudden you say, wait a second, this isn't fun anymore. Again, this RADA member, I think put it very well, said that it was like, for them, it was always something on TV, like I was saying for Americans. And now it's like, well, he said the fridge. I think maybe you could easily say a stove or the heater. And that's actually much more consequential. You just say, wait a second, this isn't just images on a screen. I am suffering personally. And that changes everything.
Okay, well, I hope it comes sooner rather than later because this is coming. This collapse
I'm
of the
losing
dollar.
you right now. Here, you're frozen.
Yeah,
Now you're back. Yeah,
okay.
You're back. Yeah.
I was just saying, I'm as crazy as it sounds. I'm hoping this happens sooner rather than later, because
I don't think that's crazy because I think that the longer we put it off, the more painful it'll be. It's just better, it's going to be painful. So and we will suffer personally because of it. But it's better to do it. The sooner, the better. It's just like. It's going to be a fall, but it's sort of like it's better to fall now. We're not that high up the cliff, but if we keep on climbing up this cliff and we know we're going to fall eventually, it's going to be even worse if we ascend higher. Again, I don't know if that really worked, but I think that's the idea.
I won't go too far down this road, but just one thing I was thinking is that if we do have an instance of like hyperinflation, like the Weimar Republic, the one thing that's different now is that we do have alternatives. There is technology in place, with gold and with crypto, that people can transact with currencies that are truly have a finite scarcity, so that way it maintains its value. So there should be able to engage in some type of commerce if people start to just pivot away, start to drop all their dollars into these assets. We'll see these other assets inflate, gold prices shoot through the roof, Bitcoin shoot to the roof, and people will start to use these sort of things that are backed by true scarcity to engage in commerce. So maybe we can get out of it and quickly move to a true system, not this fiat phony system that we have.
Well, yeah, there's that potential, but there's also, there are a lot of ways that we can muck it up, and we probably will.
Yeah, I'm sure we will. Okay, well, I was thinking one other thing I want to talk about, Greenland. Do you think that there's any chance that there could actually be any shooting over this? Like, the Europeans are trying to act tough, but do you think that they're...
I don't think so. I can't say that's absolutely zero. There's a small chance that could happen. It could be just an individual, who just can't take it and says, I'm going to fire my gun, but I think it's very unlikely. I mean, just the force differential is so huge here. And the Europeans, I think nobody takes them seriously, including themselves. I think they know they're not going to fight.
Well, yeah, we've always kind of made fun of the Europeans, saying they don't have any military to speak of, even though they talk a big talk and they act like they're so tough. Yeah. And then when this Greenland issue came up, like 8 countries got together and were able to scrounge up 37 people. Like, why did they even do that? Like, this was it was even more embarrassing than I could imagine. Like, not sending anyone. But I mean, I just I was like, I know they're weak. And when I saw this, I'm like, are you kidding me? This is you guys. You guys have to.
Right. If they showed, real resolve, like, again, I'm not a fan of Gavin Newsom at all, but I think he actually spoke very, very well on this, just decrying their lack of spine and say, come on, show that you actually have a spine, get off your knees. If they really showed it, they responded very forcefully, and they actually sent a force, we're not talking about a couple dozen, but rather of thousands, I don't even know if it's possible for them to do that, but they could get some, I think they could, and make it clear that, we are going to fight. This is important. Then You never know with Trump, but he might back down. I mean, he really might. It would. One thing is that it would be unpopular with the Americans. That's one thing that polls show. Like, I think people are fine with the idea of just buying Greenland, and then they say, "Wow, now we're the second biggest country in the world." And then if you actually buy it, it's okay. It's something that the other side agreed to. You know, maybe it was under duress, but they did. And then it's much less likely. Let's say if the Democrats come back in power, they'll just keep it. But if there was actually bloodshed and we took it by force, and again, we know how closely aligned the Democrats and the European establishment are, I think there's a chance that they would even return it. I mean, if they really want to keep Greenland and show that they're not going to be pushed around, they could do something. Again, they would lose the fight, but just by putting up a fight or showing that they really will, first of all, we just might back off. Or second, even if we took it, I think there's a better chance that the Europeans would get it back. But they're not. I don't think we're not seeing that at all. They're not going to put up a fight.
Well, it's crazy, but they're ready to take on Russia. They can't even fight for this territory the size of Mexico. Like, that's being taken by their so-called ally that they want to use to fight Russia. This whole thing is nuts.
Yeah, it is. It is. You know, it's hard to believe that, you know, I have to pinch myself and say, you know, is this really happening? But here we are.
Yeah, it's crazy. Well, I want to move over to some domestic politics a bit, because I'm a little bit worried about where this country is going with ICE. And then I don't know if you saw some videos about police officers. There's one in Miami Beach that showed up to a woman's house because of a post she made on Facebook. And it wasn't even, she was just saying that, you know, she doesn't like the genocide, essentially. And then, you know, there was another incident, I think in Texas, where they showed up. You know, it's just scary. And then these ICE officers asking people for their papers and beating up U.S. citizens. And they have the full backing of the administration. And then something that was even more terrifying for me is I saw this video of Pam Bondi, and I'll just play it for you and we can talk about it.
Sure.
I want to tell you a story right here in Florida. You probably heard of it. It's not a crime of great violence, but in my opinion, it's a crime of great significance. I give college presidents my personal cell phone, and I say, if you need anything, call me. My phone rang one day. I was sitting in the office, and it was the president of Florida State University. And he said, something just happened. Yeah, a young woman, a student, threw her phone, cursed, attacked a young student, a young man, male student, who was playing basketball because he was wearing an IDF shirt. She was a student, he was a student. I spent the next few hours on the phone. I called my U.S. attorney, I called the state attorney, called law enforcement, and I guess went through the system as it should, and she now is kicked out of Florida State University. But little things are the big things, and that sends a strong message that you can't behave that way anymore in our country. You can't bully other students simply because they're Jewish. And you think they're better than they are. Not going to happen under Donald Trump's presidency.
Yeah, right.
Well,
I mean, it's incredible that this went all the way up to the attorney general, you know. A conflict between two students. Sure, okay, that the girl that threw the phone should be disciplined, but that's just let's be honest, you know, this is a minor incident. And then the other thing I would point out is that it's not because that the male student, and I think, you know, in most cases, the male student should have, who doesn't actually have a political axe to grind, would not report it or anything. You know, it could be embarrassed to say that, oh, yeah, I'm a victim because this girl threw a phone at me. You know, say, hey, don't do that, man, or whatever, and that's it, right? But it's because he's wearing an IDF shirt. That's the thing. You know, if you could be Jewish and wearing a Palestinian flag, that would send out a different message. It's the political message. It's not the ethnicity.
Yeah, I mean, it's just crazy that she would even tell this story like it's a badge of honor. We're talking about what, a 20-year-old boy that plays basketball, clearly probably in pretty good shape. If some girl says some mean things to you, so you have to run to the administration and then get the Attorney General of the United States to devote hours of her time to make sure that this girl gets expelled.
Right.
It's insane. I mean, because like you said, he's wearing an IDF shirt, which what most people think is the IDF is engaged in a genocide. Right. That's it has nothing to do with the fact that he's Jewish, like you said.
Yeah.
It's the IDF shirt. Like that would send most people that see that would just look at that in horror. It's something that people look at and think, yeah, they associate genocide with it. We've seen all these videos of these children being killed, these women being killed. It's nuts, but it shows the position of the administration, just how Zionist they are. If I had any hope that there would be some rationality that we would act in our own self-interest. When I saw this video, I'm like, it's not, like we're completely controlled by the Jewish lobby here. It's just insane because they want to say how it's so anti-Semitic to point out these things like, a lot of Zionists are in charge of the media and the narrative. It's like, okay, well, they go out by CBS News. We see the Attorney General coming out and making this big speech about how we expelled students that behave in any way unacceptable towards a Jewish student. It's like, okay, well, this is feeding into that stereotype. You do understand that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, right. Yeah. Also, I just say in general, this is part of this of an overall very disturbing phenomenon that we see here, and that is that the administration is applying a lot of pressure to all these different universities, the campuses, and this is just one small example of it, to really shut down free speech. They are those campuses that allowed protests to take place, which, again, I grew up in the 60s in Berkeley. I remember that's just part of life in the United States, campus protests. But those universities that didn't immediately, expel all their students or, impose severe penalties on students that protested are losing funds. It has actually really has had a chilling effect. So now that you have university campuses, administrations around the country that are really suppressing free speech. And again, there are teachers, professors, even tenured professors who are finding that they can't teach anymore because of this. So there is a real, I think, clearly a free speech issue here. And this is from an administration, from one reason that this administration is now in power is that a lot of people were sick of what we call cancel culture, that really was largely on the left, prior to Donald Trump's taking office. But they have immediately, they made some statements when he first said no more cancel culture, and then they established their own form of cancel culture, and that's what we're seeing right here.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it worries me. I think we're going to see more and more crackdown, more and more censorship. It seems like, the Zionists, the Israelis, they understand that they're losing this PR war, and they're being very frustrated that no matter what they do, spending millions, billions of dollars to buy off influencers, to buy mainstream media networks, none of it's working. Purchasing, getting control of TikTok, all of this stuff. It's still not working. So what's the one option to have left? Censorship. We got to pull those levers, shut people up. Let me actually show you the video of the incident that she's talking about, just so you can see how benign it is. There's bad language, just so everybody listening, if you don't want to hear bad language, but I'm sure everyone's fine.
Fuck Israel, free Palestine, put it on fucking Barstool FSU. I really don't give a fuck. You're an ignorant fucking son of a bitch.
That was the incident.
Yeah. So that went to the Attorney General.
That one, she had to drop everything she was doing. Oh my God, I got to work on this. I got to and ensure that he gets fired, that she gets expelled. I mean, it's insane. Whereas, we have Renee Good was shot in the face 3 times and killed. And instead of saying at least that this was an excess use of force and we're going to look into it and make sure that this behavior doesn't happen, U.S. citizens, don't worry, you will be safe. Like, that's what we needed to hear. Instead, they labeled Renee Good as a domestic terrorist and said that we got the full backing of ICE. And it's just like, oh boy, where are we going now? It is it's worrying.
Yeah, no, it is. Again, this is another example of where the administration, they came in with a lot of support for a new immigration policy. And this is actually something that you find on both sides of the spectrum. Biden himself had to reverse his very, very lax border policies because it was hurting him within his own party. And there's one reason, too, I think that, again, that Donald Trump was elected. Now, yeah, but this is not something that we bargained for. People that wanted to see the immigration laws enforced wanted to see them enforced, according to law, and obviously that's not what's happening. These incidents are very troubling, and you can say, well, any sort of massive operation, there are going to be some incidents and there are going to be some bad apples. But when those incidents occur, you have to show that, these things are unacceptable. And I find the most troubling thing about that Renee Good incident was the reaction of the administration, Trump, Vance, and others. Simply, labeled her as a domestic terrorist. And the responsible thing would have been to say, at the very least, just simply say, okay, no, we need to investigate this fully and determine what happened. And if, indeed this was unjustified, this person needs to be punished. That's the truth. That's what you need to say, but we didn't get that. And again, it just shows, I think, a real disregard for the rules, and for, again, we had a problem on the left, but now that we have the right in power, it's not that, now we have a restoration of order, we have, or a reestablishment of the rules. We have new excesses, we have we're introducing, again, just an arbitrariness and obviously any, you look at that and you do see a government that's out of control.
Well, what do you think we can expect? Do you think that they can really get away with increased censorship? I just feel like my only reason to hope is that I think enough people are aware of the situation when they do attempt to, maybe remove people from YouTube, like our channel or whatever, that people will know where it's coming from and that there will be an even bigger backlash. Everybody knows. It's so obvious now. At least I hope it's obvious.
I hope so. Right. I think that the Israelis, again, Netanyahu called this the Eighth Front, right? Again, the war that's being waged over the control of information, over media outlets. I think this is a war that cannot be won. Now, again, I think immigration we have to set aside. That's not Zionism. That's something else. Okay, that is. But of course, when we're talking about anti-IDF protests or behavior in campuses, we are talking about that. There's no question about it. Well, anyway, they're waging this war. I think that they're going to fail. Sometimes I worry, though, that maybe they'll succeed, but I don't see how. So far it seems like it's actually the steps that they have taken have actually convinced a lot of people, of the reality of of Zionist influence in this country. And I think it's going to continue to be that way. It's not like it used to be a couple of decades ago when you just had, 3 major broadcasting systems. And if you controlled those, you controlled pretty much, and maybe half a dozen major papers. And you controlled those, you can control the discourse. That's no longer the case. I don't think they can control it. And when they make obvious efforts to control it, okay, maybe they get control of CBS, they get control of TikTok. But then there are all these other platforms, and they're just not. It's going to be a whack-a-mole. They're not going to be able to get it all. It's not for a lack of trying. Actually, just to maybe change the topic slightly. We've had these incidents in Syria recently. Yeah, it's more than an incident. It's just the al-Jawlani or al-Shiraz government is, or his forces anyway, are taking control of the Kurdish areas in northeastern Syria. Okay, well, I was just researching about that. I saw a very, very interesting YouTube podcast with Kavor Kalmasyan. He's the Armenian, he's a man of Armenian descent, but who, was born and grew up in Syria. And so is very, very familiar with what's going on there. And he has the channel called Syriana Analysis. And he was interviewing another reporter who, again, who really focuses on Syria and actually had spent most of her time within the Kurdish areas. Both of these reporters who have been experienced, been reporting on the area for a long time. And they both said, I think I mentioned this earlier about Kavor Kalmasyan, that they had been approached by the Israelis. He several times offered money if he would, project, start expressing pro-Israeli opinions. Start telling the Syrians, you need to, the Israel, your hope is with Israel, and he knows that there have been many, many people approached. He's just one. They've approached him several times. And of course, he refused again and again, rejected the offers of money. But he knows that many others accepted them. And they're working for the Israelis, influencers in different parts of Syria. And this other woman, she too, she said she was approached several times. There's just this all out, you see part of that eighth front, it's not just the U.S., it's around the world. And it's something that the Israelis really work hard on. And they may be, to some extent, successful in a place like Syria because so many people are so desperate that they really are hurting for money. They really are suffering terrible poverty. They really are scared, and somebody offers them a helping hand. They'll go again. They'll just lay their misgivings aside and accept it.
Do you think when we talk about this eighth front that there's like a section of Mossad or the IDF that is just completely dedicated to this, and they build up strategy? Okay, like this is our messaging, and this is how we're going to disseminate it.
Yeah,
Methods.
Yeah, it's well known. There are Hasbara teams. Hasbara. That's something funded by the Israeli government. I don't know exactly under which agency they operate the Hasbara teams, but they exist, and they are funded by the U.S. By the Israeli government. Not
Which
everything they
the
do is, so some of it is directly government controlled, and another is indirectly, through people, various people that are allied with Israel. Zionist Jews that live in other countries that offer up their services. And I think that's true of the person that approached Kavor Kalmasyan. He wasn't, apparently at least to his knowledge, he was not an agent of the Israeli government. But he was clearly working for Israeli interests, and he would constantly refer to we want this, we want that, and he would kind of wonder what the we was. I think the we is the Israel, and the Zionists.
Yeah, well, it seems like the messaging that the Zionists are trying, that the Hasbara teams are doing here within the West, which I think is pretty effective, is this instead of just focusing on anti-Semitism in Israel because they realize that's backfiring, their focus now is that Islam is not compatible with the West, that there's this civilizational battle. And unfortunately, I think they are having some success with that. So the way things are going, maybe there will be increased censorship laws, but they will cast a wider net to something that they know that there is a strong base, that people are in the United States are receptive to the idea that Islam is this the enemy of Christianity, and that's the battle. And so they will be more accepting to round up people or silence people under this umbrella, and with it they can throw any dissent of Israel under there, because that fits under that. They can make it fit under that umbrella. It's like, oh, they support a terrorist group, Hamas, whatever it is. That's what I'm afraid is going to happen, and that this, they may not be able to censor everybody fully, but they could maybe start some type of almost like a civil war, that there's this huge rip because they keep on pushing that messaging that we're in an existential battle. Western civilization is under attack, and it's under attack from Islam. It's under attack from Muslims. And so, we just have to stand united and use any method possible, to protect Western civilization. And Israel is the leader and at the forefront of this battle.
Yeah. Well, that's long been Netanyahu's message, that he's been pushing that for a while. So I understand they are pushing that particularly hard recently. It's maybe decided it's best let's not talk about Gaza. Let's just talk about Muslims, right? Because they understand talking about Gaza doesn't help them. I'm sure they've had success in the past, and they will continue to have some success. I know that they're particularly targeting Christian Zionists, certain Christian, mega churches, and especially in certain parts of the country. And they're targeting AI. They will have successes, but whether it's sufficient, I'm sure they'll convince certain demographic groups, maybe that are already predisposed to, and they'll keep them on board. Maybe they'll be able to keep the Christian Zionists on board, and other groups. They'll continue to exercise a great deal of influence over Congress, just through the use of money. But we have to admit that is starting to, they're losing their grip there. Increasingly, candidates on the Democratic side of the aisle are telling their voters that I'm not taking AIPAC money. That's, it used to be it was a given. You just took AIPAC money. And now they're saying we're not doing it. So I see them losing the grip, but they're going to fight hard, and they're going to hold on to what they can. And I think I'll repeat what I said earlier. It's just like if it looks like they're really losing their grip, then we could see even extra constitutional. Well, I think we could say we're already seeing extra constitutional measures, this crackdown on dissent on the campuses, or at least that verges on it. And we may continue in that direction where we get real outright, authoritarian suppression. If the Zionist establishment can't maintain control, through completely legal and constitutional means, they may increasingly resort to other means.
Yeah, I mean, the Zionists are clear that they'll go to any lengths to try to fight and win this battle, but I feel like it doesn't matter what they do, they can never win this war. If the world is going into a multipolar world, then can Israel even exist in a multipolar world?
It'll be a lot harder. The unipolar world, it was much better for them, and they would like to maintain it, but I don't think they can. So their position will weaken. In that sense, we're not just talking about the battle for the minds and hearts of Americans and Europeans, but just the position of the United States in the world. That's critical to the Zionist project. Of course, is the strength of the United States, and as the U.S. weakens, so does the Zionist project weaken.
Yeah, and the multipolar world is inevitable. So a
lot of so many of these trends are looking in the short run. Again, it just looks very, very grim for the Palestinians and for the Syrians and everybody, that lives in a country that borders Israel. In the long run, I think I still believe that the Zionist project is doomed. The long-term trends are going against Zionism.
When you say it's doomed, does that mean you think that all the Jews in Israel will flee somewhere else? Like that's what it means?
It's possible. It's possible.
What country would take them in? How would this work?
Well, there are a lot of countries that have very, very close relationships with Israel.
It's going to be, what am I talking about? It's going to be America.
You're right, America, Germany,
Well, I was thinking about Argentina because of those fires. If they wanted to be as, I think they want an ethno-state, right? Will they be okay with being in a country where they are not they don't have their ethno-state?
Yeah, I don't know. We're getting who knows? Maybe it'll be reborn somewhere else in the world. That's possible. There were, again, before the Zionism took root, or established its first outposts in Palestine, really at the beginning of the 20th century. There was talk about, maybe establishing a Jewish state in Madagascar. Well, yeah, that was Hitler's idea, but, actually so I'm not going to talk about that one. But in Uganda, my birthplace, it was suggested the Brits, because they had control of the Palestine at that time. They actually suggested Uganda.
I also heard Argentina was suggested as well. Argentina and Uganda. Yeah.
It could have been. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. It would have been a lot different back then. I mean, who knows? Maybe they could have actually succeeded with their ethno-state, because they would have gone to, if they went to Argentina, for example, they probably could have got a huge swath of land that's uninhabited. It could have succeeded if it was uninhabited. The problem is they they took over a place that was inhabited, that was full of people, and just started killing them and kicking them out. It's just
right. And
didn't end. That's not going to end well. It's just it's too unjust. It's so unjust that no matter how much money and power and propaganda, there'll always be people that will want to fight back against it, because it's that unjust.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, Dad. Well, I think we can end it there.
Sure.
Anything else you want to say?
No, I think we did enough for today. I think we probably should talk about Syria and more about Ukraine next time, but we'll do that. There's plenty to talk about.
Yeah. It's getting crazier every day, it feels like. All right, Dad. Thanks a bunch. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.